Well, here we go with chapter 15 of the book of Deuteronomy. So, in this chapter, a couple things we get to learn. One is every 7 years, all debts are to be released. Boy, wouldn't that be nice? The people are admonished to care for the poor. Hebrew servants are to be released and given gifts during the 7th year. The firstling males of herds and flocks are the Lord's. So, a couple of real interesting concepts we're going to talk about. Verse 1, at the end of every 7 years, thou shalt make a release, and this is the manner of the release. Every creditor that lendeth aught unto his neighbor shall release it. He shall not exact of it of his neighbor or of his brother, because it is called the Lord's release. Of a foreigner thou mayst exact it again, but that which is thine with thy brother thine hand shall release. So this is one of their principles that they lived by, was every 7 years is a Jubilee year, a year of the Lord. Just like every 7 days is a year, is a day to the Lord, basically. So with this is you are to release debts, basically. So debts can't go on for forever. They go every 7 years. It's important to realize too that in looking at this, if you're in year 6, you can't deny someone necessarily a debt just because next year is year 7. So they talk about that back in, let's see, that would have been Leviticus. They talked about that. Okay, so let's move on here. Verse 4, save when there shall be no poor among you, for the Lord shall greatly bless thee in the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee for an inheritance to possess it. So when it comes to the foreigners, you can keep getting paid back unless there's no poor people among you. If you don't have any poor, then don't worry about it. You know, God's taking care of you and you're fine. Verse 5, only if thou carefully hearken unto the voice of the Lord thy God to observe and to do all these commandments which I command thee this day. For the Lord thy God blesseth thee as he promised thee, and thou shalt lend unto many nations, but thou shalt not borrow. Thou shalt reign over many nations, but they shall not reign over thee. So, very important point in there. They can be a lender, they can lend to other nations, but they can't be a debtor nation. They can't get into debt to other nations, basically. Verse 7, if there be among you a poor man of one of thy brethren within any of thy gates in thy land, which the Lord thy God giveth thee, thou shalt not harden thine heart, nor shut thine hand from thy poor brother. But thou shalt open thine hand wide unto him, and shalt surely lend him sufficient for his need in that which he wanteth. Beware that there be not a thought in thy wicked heart, saying, the 7th year, the year of release, is at hand, and thine eye be evil against thy poor brother, and thou givest him not, and he cry unto the Lord against thee, and it be sin unto thee. Thou shalt surely give him, and thine heart shall not be grieved when thou givest unto him, because that for this thing the Lord thy God shall bless thee in all thy works, and in all that thou puttest thine hand unto. For the poor shall never cease out of the land. Therefore I command thee, saying, thou shalt open thine hand wide unto thy brother, to thy poor, to thy needy in thy land. So again, they brought this point up that, hey, if it's getting close to that Jubilee year, you're not allowed to deny somebody if they need help. So if they need help, they need to borrow some money from you to get by, they need your help, and you know, well, next year I'm not going to get paid back. What the Lord's really talking about in here is that if you follow his commandments, even though that means you're going to lose, because maybe you don't get paid back all the way from your brother, whoever you lend it to, the reality is that God is going to bless you. So God is going to take care of, excuse me, God is going to take care of making sure you are satisfied with this. So instead of your brother paying you back, God will pay you back. And I think for a lot of people, this is like, oh, this is not going to work. This is not going to work. We got to realize that this requires faith in God to make this work. So you need to make sure that you're realizing that God wants to build the faith of these people. He wants them to have more faith on him. And this is still something he wants for us today. Have more faith in God by relying on him to help us more. This is a very important point that even in our day and age is just as relevant and just as important for us. Okay, how can we have more faith in God and less emphasis on faith in man? This is a good way to do it. Okay, verse 12. And if thy brother, an Hebrew man or an Hebrew woman, be sold unto thee, and serve thee 6 years, then in the 7th year thou shalt let him go free from thee. When thou sendest him out free from thee, thou shalt not let him go away empty. Thou shalt furnish him liberally out of thy flock, and out of thy floor, and out of thy winepress, of that wherewith the Lord thy God hath blessed thee, thou shalt give unto him. Thou shalt remember that thou wast a bondman in the land of Egypt, and the Lord thy God redeemed thee. Therefore I command thee this thing today. And it shall be, if he say unto thee, I go not away from thee, because he loveth thee in thine house, because he is well with thee, then thou shalt take an awl, and thrust it through his ear unto the door, and he shall be thy servant forever, and also unto thy maidservant shalt thou do likewise. It shall not seem hard unto thee when thou sendest him away from thee, for he hath been worth a double hired servant to thee. In serving thee 6 years, the Lord thy God shall bless thee in all that thou doest. Now that might sound a little bit strange in what they're talking about here, but if you, back then, it wasn't uncommon to be a servant, to be in debt to somebody by serving them. This was one way that you could pay a debt back. If somebody helped you out, or if you needed to, you'd sometimes sell your children into servitude to pay a debt. So if you bought basically the services of another person, they were a servant to you. They lived in your household. They did what you did. You were a ruler over them, basically. They couldn't just leave anytime they wanted to. They had to ask you for permission. They were, in a way, your property to an extent. What they're saying here is, of course, every 7 years, you let all of your Hebrew servants go. If they're indentured to you, you let them go, and you give them a gift. You let them pick some of the best of what you've got to allow them to go, and then they can start their own life. They can move forward. Again, a good principle of not being indebted to people, maybe, is probably a way to say it. We got to learn to be, the point is to help each other to become better, not to enrich ourselves at the expense of others. That's that Master Mahan principle. So this is counteracting that principle of not putting money over people, and not putting that your wealth over people as well. So helping you to forget, get rid of that habit of, I want my stuff more than I love these people. That's not a good thing. So what's interesting though is, let's say they decide, hey, I like it here. I love being a servant for you. I love what I do. This works out great. I want to be a servant for the rest of my life. Then what they do is they take an awl, which is a little tool you can use to make holes in things, basically. Uh, and you put your ear up against the door, and you stick an awl right there, and you basically pierce their ear. Which is just crazy to think about, because these aren't like super fine. You try to get it as fine point as you can, but it's not like just a little needle going through. It's a little bit bigger than that. Bam, and they basically nail you to the door, and that is a sign that they want to be with you forever, and then you don't have to let them go. They can be your servant for forever, basically. So kind of interesting way to do it, but that's how they did it back then. All right, verse 19. All the firstling males that come of thy herd and of thy flock, thou shalt sanctify unto the Lord thy God. Thou shalt do no work with the firstling of the bullock, nor shear the firstling of thy sheep. Thou shalt eat it before the Lord thy God year by year in the place which the Lord shall choose, thou and thy household. And if there be any blemish therein, as if it be lame or blind, or have any ill blemish, thou shalt not sacrifice it unto the Lord thy God. Thou shalt eat it within thy gates. The unclean and the clean person shall eat it alike, as the roebuck and as the hart. Only thou shalt not eat the blood thereof. Thou shalt pour it upon the ground as water. So they've talked about this earlier. Remember a couple chapters ago about not eating or using the blood, but spilling it out, getting rid of it. And then, of course, the firstling males are given for sacrifices, and they outlined in Leviticus all those different sacrifices that we do. One thing that's interesting about this chapter too is Hugh Nibley in his book Approaching Zion says this. He says, their perpetual presence, meaning the poor, talking about the poor here, the perpetual presence of the poor is not to make us indifferent, but it is a constant reminder that God has his eye on us. If you remember back in verse 11, we talked about this, that the poor will never cease. You're always going to have poor people among you. Uh, but your job is not to ignore them or get used to seeing them, but help them up, help them overcome the challenges that they have, help them to become better so that there's no more poor among you. So that's very important and a principle that's still applicable today. How can we be more helpful to others? I know today there's a lot of scammers and people who are lying, and they they want help, but they just want handouts. Basically, they don't really want to work for things. um, the thing that's important to realize is we as people can make decisions who we give our money to, and I recommend giving them to more of an established charity rather than to individuals. But here's the point, though. The point is, it's not your job to determine how they spend the money you give them. It's your job to give them the money. Now, if they spend it in a way that isn't conducive to what they told you, like let's say oh yeah, we need all this money to help somebody out, but that person's not really sick. They're lying just to make more money, just to make money, basically. Then the problem is with them, not with you. You can freely give. You'll be blessed for giving to them because you sincerely wanted to help them. And your intent in your heart was, I'm going to help this person out. However, that person was lying. Okay, it's not you won't get a negative because of it. If they spend your money unwisely, they get the negative, not you. You get blessed. Regardless of what they do with the money, you get blessed for helping them. So realize that you don't need to, if don't feel bad if they do things bad. It's sad. It's unfortunate. I'd feel, for me, I feel bad for the person more than that they got some money from me, because we want to help them out, and obviously they're not really helping themselves if they're lying to you to get money. But the point is giving. Okay, if you give, you'll get blessed. You don't your reward will be none less. Okay, even if they are a scammer, it's them that'll have the responsibility of dealing with that. So just realize that. Give to the poor. What can we do to help more people out? That's really the point of money, is how do we help more people with what we've got? And with our time, with our resources, everything like that. That's a Zion society. A Zion society is, well, they talk about sometimes calling it all things in common. What it comes down to is you learn to love people more than stuff. So you're more free and open with your stuff to allow people help. And the more you do that, then the more the Lord can bless you, and the more love and connections you can have with people, and the closer you come to Zion. Okay, that's a very important point. Zion is a people who love people more than stuff by a lot. So well, let's stick around for the next chapter and see what is the next set of advice that Moses has for the children of Israel.